And hello there, everybody, and welcome to this latest installment of the Recap Show, as I like to call it, recap of non-televised games for week number 11. I am Big Polly, and together we are going to go look at 6 of the 16 games played in week 11. And I should get my little sheet out here to know which games to do and which games not to do, and you see it there. Well, you probably can't see it all that well, but I'll move it over here to the right side, my second monitor. During the middle of week 10, I picked the games for week 11, and I looked at which teams had the most combined wins. The 10 most teams, the 10 such games with the most combined wins were the games that I did or going to do here in week 11. If there was a tie, I took the combined power rating of the two teams playing, and that's how I broke any tie. So we're going to show you 6 games. We're going to autoplay 6 games, show you the box scores, and show you the standings as those 6 games are entered. Now, some of you might be wondering, and some of you may be uh, brand new to this HTFL Hometown Football League that I have been doing since the spring. And I thought I would explain the league a little bit. You could see a video that I did called the HTFL Explain. You might want to search on YouTube for that. And if you've seen that video, ignore the next couple of minutes. But I'm going to explain to you very briefly what the Hometown Football League is. And I'll probably do this as the playoffs start. There are 75 men on each of the 32 teams. The 32 teams represent each market, but not each franchise necessarily. For instance, with Los Angeles, you have players from the Rams, the Raiders, the LA Chargers, perhaps in some future time. Probably not now because they've just started playing there again, and they played there in 1960. Dallas has members of the Cowboys and Texans. Chicago has members of the Bears and the pre-St. Louis and Arizona Cardinals, and so forth. 75 men make the roster. These are players from all time, representing all eras, from 1940 onward, as the Dave Koch Sports historical set would indicate. And I use Action PC Football 2020 to do this. There are 33 offensive players, quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, tackles, guards, and center. You have some players who could play multiple positions, it wasn't that uncommon prior to 1960s, where you had players who played both offensively and defensively. Chuck Bednarik of the Eagles was the last to play offensively and defensively. And 66 of those 75 players are offensive and defensive players, the best 11s. First team, second team, third team. 4 will be special teams players, a kicker, a punter, a kick returner, and a punt returner. And then 5 players will be wild card players that were just added based on who had the highest salary. You could have a 4th quarterback, you could have a 7 wide receiver, but 1 additional player for each position. So the 5 wild card players could not be couldn't wind up with 8 quarterbacks. You couldn't wind up with a whole bunch of wide receivers and so forth. As I was saying, the teams are kind of mishmashes there. It's not franchise all-stars. It is the best representing each market. Like San Francisco, you have which I call the Gold Raiders, because you have players from the 49ers and Raiders. New York, you have players from the Giants, Jets, Bulldogs, New York Bulldogs, who were a team in the NFL in the early 50s. Look it up. New York Yankees of the AAFC, and the Brooklyn Dodgers. Chicago, as I was saying, Bears and Cardinals. Dallas, Cowboys and Texans. St. Louis they're called the Maroons, and they use Cardinals from 60 to 87, and then Rams from 95 to 2015. Baltimore uses Colts and Ravens. Houston uses Oilers and Texans. And that leaves you with 31 teams. So what I did was I created a 32nd team called the Las Vegas Ironmen. And they use everybody else that wasn't selected by the other 31 teams. And eventually, if I do future seasons of the HTFL, what I will do is when Las Vegas players are available, I will start filling them in on the Las Vegas franchise, and we'll use the best of the rest to fill in the gaps. There are 8 divisions in the hometown football league. Instead of using an AFC and an NFC, I kind of broke it down along the lines of the Eastern, Southern, Northern, and Western divisions. And you see the lineups there. St. Louis, I wound up putting in the lower East, and Las Vegas is in the lower West. It's made for some very interesting divisional races. For instance, the Upper West, you have San Francisco, Denver, and Kansas City really fighting it out. Now, each each of the Easts make up the conference, upper and lower. So there are 8 teams in the conference. You'll have the Upper East champion, the Lower East champion, and 2 wildcard teams make it. And the tiebreakers are head-to-head. If there was a head-to-head meeting, that's first. If they played in the same division, then the division record comes into play. And then otherwise, it's net points, the points scored, subtracting the points given up. And if that's tied, then it comes down to the most points scored. Then it's the Dave Koch Sports computer rankings, power rankings, and then we go to a coin toss. The rules: kickoffs are from the 35-yard line. All turnovers and scores are subject to a replay review. Teams get 1 challenge per game for anything like, say, the spot of the ball, or did a receiver make a catch, or was there a fumble, things like that. Extra points are all initiated from the same spot, regardless whether or not a team wants to go for 1 point or 2 points. So there is no jazz about kicking with the line of scrimmage being from the 15-yard line on extra points. You could kick from the 2, or you can go for 2 from the 2-yard line or 3-yard line, or whatever they use. Overtime uses the pre-2010 format. It's simple. First team that scores wins in the regular season. If they go 15 minutes, it's a tie, which is yet to happen in the HTFL. And in the playoffs, it's overtime till somebody wins. First scorer wins, no matter when that happens. As I was saying, the game uses the 2020 edition of Action PC Football. Players are selected from the 2019 Pro Football History Collection, and Dave Koch Sports should probably be coming out with another Pro Football History Collection probably by the end of the year, I would think. But not every player from modern times is on the historical collection. For instance, Kansas City does not have Pat Mahomes, and Baltimore doesn't have Lamar Jackson on its historical set in the historical collection. But as they get more seasons under their belt, they will be there. Like, for instance, Mike Evans of Tampa Bay, who's played a few seasons, is in the historical collection. But somebody more recent probably won't be there yet. And for those of you who have the Action PC Football 2020 game, here are the settings that I use. I use the historical average game era. Home team advantage is set to 3. No usage penalties of every kind, because in this game, in this historical setup, everybody has kind of been tested. So there is no need to have a usage penalty. No more than 6 players can be injured during a season. No more than 3 players can be injured per game. And injuries are set to normal, and penalties are set to realistic. Now, let's show you, as I switch a couple of things around here, the leaders as we go into week 11. We'll go over the leaders after 10 weeks of play, and then I will show you the playoff projections if the season happened to end right now, which it won't. Drew Brees is leading the way in fact, let me pull up the leaders here. And this is not going to help you see it any better, so maybe I should just put this away. I'll just read off the leaders here. And if you're watching on YouTube, just pull it up a little closer, maybe expand that screen on YouTube, and we'll go through all of this together. Drew Brees, the clear leader right now in passing rating at 114.7. Dawson of Kansas City behind him at 107.4. Jim Brown leading the way in rushing at 1,164 yards, though Walter Payton is catching up at 1,138. LaShawn McCoy, with a great game last week against Arizona, crosses the 1,000-yard mark. He's at 10:04. Marshall Faulk leading the way in receiving, number of receptions at 52. Julio Jones and Larry Centers right behind that Faulk. Scoring among non-kickers, Jim Brown with 84 points leading the way, so that's 14 touchdowns he has scored, with Damian Tomlinson 74, so that's 12 and a 2-point conversion. Wendell Tyler of Las Vegas and Jim Taylor of Green Bay at 72 points. Now, among kickers, Sebastian Janikowski, who plays for San Francisco, because, reminder, San Francisco and Oakland are combined as a one entry because they share the same media market. He has 76 points. Zerline of St. Louis, who missed a game earlier in the year, at 73, and Ryan Lindell at 72. In receiving yard terms, Julio Jones leads the way from the Falcons at 820. And then you got Smith and Sharp behind him. Your sack leader right now, Kevin Green of the LA Rams at 8. Larry Wilson of San Francisco with 4 interceptions leads that category. And Levante David, who we just saw against Baltimore in the Monday night game last week, has 83 tackles. San Francisco, the best offense of the league at 31.1 points. Cleveland at 30.7. New Orleans, a very impressive 30.2. Baltimore and St. Louis leading up the rear. Washington with the best defense at 15.1. Then it's Carolina, New York, Philadelphia, and Seattle. Power rankings. Computer thinks that Washington is the best team right now. St. Louis, Cleveland, San Francisco, New York. It's going to be a very interesting finish to the season. And some more detail on the passing stats. Eli Manning with 24 touchdowns. Drew Brees with a .3 interception percentage. Rushing, you have Walter Payton leading with 190 attempts. Jim Brown leading in average with 6.5, and he's also leading the way in rushing touchdowns with 13. Receiving, Jones, as we were saying earlier, has 830 receiving yards. The per-catch average leader is Paul Warfield of Cleveland at 23.6, and Jimmy Smith leading the way with 10 receiving touchdowns. Let's look at defense, and we mentioned a few of these stats already. We'll look at hurries, quarterback hurries. Richard Dent of Chicago leading the way on that front at 17. Deflections, Lair Malloy of New England at 21. Stuffs, Levante David, 11. Warren Moon with 5 fumble recoveries, so he's recovered his fumbles 5 times. Forced fumbled Phillips of San Diego, that's Sean Phillips, he has 6. And opponent's completion percentage, I guess is a defensive back stats, it is Jim Johnson. When they throw to him, his completion percentage when you throw to him, throw the ball his way, is only 26.1. And he's beating out Lester Hayes, Patrick Surtain, Allen, who is Eric Allen out of Philadelphia, and a bunch of other players. Okay, special teams. Jenkins of Arizona, Marte Jenkins, has the best kickoff return average at 29.4. Gross punting, before you figure in net yards, it's Brett Kern of Tennessee leading at 47.0. Len Younts of the New York Giants at 42.7 net. Always talk about when there are punts, you have the gross number punt, the way the ball travels in the air, and then when you lop off the return, that's your net yardage. And Billy White Shoes Johnson is your leading punt returner with a 12.7 average. Rob Baronis of Tennessee at 88.9. Return yardage, Dante Hall leading at 1094. Zerline has hit 17 field goals. He leads the league. And Morton, Anderson, and Baronis of Tennessee each have kicked 4 field goals of more than 50 yards. Team statistics will give you a more detailed look at the scoring breakdown. The 5 worst offenses in the NFL right now, in the HTFL, not the NFL, what am I thinking? Philadelphia, Seattle, Arizona, Atlanta, Arizona, then Tennessee. The most porous defenses right now, Cincinnati, Arizona, Jacksonville, Indianapolis, and Tampa Bay leading the rear at 32.7. And pretty much does it. Now we will look at the playoff projections. Here's my little Jeopardy board. If the playoffs were today, here's who would make it. In the North, Cleveland, Green Bay, Minnesota, and Baltimore. Now this will change several times before we finalize everything after week 17. In the East, probably the most competitive division conference of the four right now, Washington and New York. Washington's 8-1, New York 7-2, and St. Louis and New England are no slouches. In the South, the weakest of the divisions, I would think, you got Carolina, New Orleans, Houston, and Atlanta would make the playoffs with losing records. Houston is 4-5 at the moment, and Atlanta is 3-6. Out west, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Kansas City, and Denver, with San Diego lurking right behind. Tampa Bay and Seattle, and your winner was not Tampa Bay, it was Seattle, 21-14. So Tampa Bay is going to fall to 0-10 on the year. We'll look at the MVP was Sean Alexander. Tampa Bay, Derek Brooks finally returned one for a touchdown. He had a whole bunch of returns for touchdowns in that 2002 season where the Bucs did so well. And it was 21-14 at Quest Field in Seattle, a 56-degree day. And let's look at the team stats. 281 for Tampa Bay, 333 for Seattle. They were perfect in the red zone, 3 touchdowns on 3 penetrations. Tampa Bay ran 58 plays. Seattle held it for 71. And there were 15 penalties in the game, and Seattle had 28 first downs to Tampa Bay's 17. Alexander was 20 for 89. Rushing the ball, and he also had 2 catches for 16 yards. DeBerg, 21 of 35, 180 yards. And we'll look at the scoring summary again before we leave this game. Leading tacklers, we had 3 with 10 tackles, Derek Brooks, John Lynch, and Brown of Seattle. So Seattle jumped out to a 14-0 lead. And they held that in the first half. Wilson threw a 2-yard pass to Williams. John L. Williams and Sean Alexander scored from 3. Dunn cut it to 14-7 with the extra point by Husted. Alexander, with the 20-yard run, sealed the game. And then Brooks with the pick with 3:42 left in the game made it a little closer. But it was Tampa Bay losing to Seattle. Seattle goes to 4-6, but they still got a lot of work to do in the Upper West, and Tampa Bay now 0-10. I don't think anybody expected that when this season started, I should say. New England and Arizona will be our next stop. New England 5-4, Arizona 1-8, and your winner here was Arizona. How about that? 28-21. We'll look at the box score. Arizona had a 28-7 lead. McCown was red hot. He threw 3 touchdown passes in the second, third, and fourth quarters. 2 to Larry Centers and 1 to Johnson. Williams had an interception return. Brady threw 2 touchdowns to make it close in the last 7 minutes of the game, but it was 28-21 Arizona, and that's going to hurt New England's chances. Josh McCown. I think it was Josh McCown. He was the player of the game with his 3 touchdown passes at University of Phoenix Stadium. We'll look at the team stats real fast. 492 yards for New England total. They were perfect in the red zone. That was Arizona, but Arizona only made 1 trip. They had 340 yards total. 22 penalties in the game, which probably would have driven my hair out if I had played the game. And I have a lot of hair, folks. 1 turnover, that was New England's, and time of possession about even. New England had 74 plays, and Arizona 62. Brady, not a good game for him. He was sacked 3 times, threw 1 pick, had 2 touchdowns, 22 of 48, 304 yards, so he got frantic trying to move the ball down the field. Cunningham Sam Cunningham had a great game in defeat, 18 carries, 153 yards. And let's see here. Centers had 7 catches for 97. Anquan Bolden, 5 catches for 85. Leading tackler of the game was Brown of, I think that was Troy Brown. He had 14 tackles. So amazingly, Arizona has moved to 2-8, and that leaves Tampa Bay clearly in last place in all of the league. Our next stop's going to be Atlanta and Buffalo up here on the right-hand corner. And I should set these games. Well, I could do it later to automatic. And what happened with Atlanta and Buffalo? Buffalo wins by a field goal, 24-21. And we will look, it was a wild first quarter with 24 of the 45 points being scored there. And Buffalo got out to a 17-0 lead, 2 touchdown passes by Jim Kelly in that barrage, and then Kelly got a 3rd touchdown throw. Matt Ryan also threw for 3 touchdowns. Andre Reed was the MVP of the game with 2 touchdown catches. So that was a tight one, 24-21. Atlanta cut it close with a score with 1:10 to go, but they could not get it done. So Atlanta's going to fall even farther. Team stats. Oh, don't get no closer than this. 399 Atlanta, 400 Buffalo. Each team perfect in the red zone, in 2 trips, 2 touchdowns, 10 penalties in the game. Atlanta ran 71 plays. Buffalo ran 65. They held the ball. Buffalo did 30 minutes 58 seconds, and Atlanta had it for 29:02. Jim Kelly, a 124.6 rating, 21 of 32, 281 yards, 3 touchdowns, no picks. Matt Ryan, not a bad game. He was 31 of 51, 360 yards. What was the weather like in Buffalo? It was 38 degrees. So we'll get back to the player stats. 145-yard game for Julio Jones, which would probably widen his receiving yardage lead. It was Andre Reed with 147 on 7 catches. Baldwin, 104 yards on 9 catches. Let's see who the leading tacklers were. We had Brown of Atlanta leading the way with 10 tackles. So there, your final score was 24-21, and that puts Atlanta to 3-7, and Buffalo at 4-6 probably knocks Atlanta out of playoff contention, depending on how the rest of the games go. So that brings us to Chicago and Cincinnati, which will be over here on the right side. And your winner there was Chicago, 27-23, interestingly. And we'll look through the stats real fast of that game. Walter Payton, MVP. Even though they were the road team, they win. And Payton had 2 touchdowns early in the game against 2 field goals for Cincinnati. Then Orton threw a 52-yarder to Graham with the mixed extra point. Then Mike Ditka got on the board with a 35-yard touchdown. And Cincinnati was playing catch-up most of the way. Now, let me see the box score again. I wasn't done with it. Thank you. 480 yards of total offense for Cincinnati. Kenny Anderson was 340 of those yards. Chicago perfect in the red zone, 330 yards, 2 trips to the red zone, 16 penalties in the game, 43 plays by Chicago, and 90 for Cincinnati. Cincinnati held the ball 41-23 and could not get the win. Cincinnati only held it 18-37 and did win. So that's kind of interesting. Payton actually threw the ball once, and it was Orton who didn't get many opportunities to throw, but when he did, he was lethal. The passing rating he had was 137.5. Payton, 116 yards. And Graham, 4 catches for 147, including a 66-yarder. Standing out for Cincinnati, Dan Ross, 119 yards. And we'll look at the defensive stats. 13 tackles by Carrier, Mark Carrier, the other Mark Carrier, who plays with the Bears. Tampa Bay's HTFL team also has a Mark Carrier. So we should note the distinction. So that's 4 games that I have shown you. We next go to New Orleans and Indianapolis. New Orleans 5-4, Indianapolis 3-6. New Orleans comes in a 5-point favorite despite being on the road. And your winner here was Indianapolis 31 to 21. So New Orleans slumping. MVP of this game was Marshall Faulk. And Indianapolis held a lead of 14-7, and they got 24 unanswered to go up 31-7 early in the fourth. New Orleans cut it close, and it was 31-21. And there you see the scoring summary there, solo. This game, New Orleans had 419 yards, Indianapolis 285. Manning was perfect, almost perfect, 17 of 20, 172 yards. And Breeze, 24 of 34, 228. They ran 59 plays. New Orleans did. Indianapolis 57. And both quarterbacks had over a 100-yard passing rating. Ricky Williams, 129 yards rushing, and he was the only offensive standout outside of the quarterbacks. Bethea, 11 tackles for Indianapolis, and he was the leading tackler on either side. So Indianapolis stunning New Orleans, who has now dropped to 5-5, and Houston could sneak in to that lower South Division race based on that stat. And our final stop on the recap show, and then we'll talk about the games we will have for you in the next 2 weeks right here on the Hometown Football League, which I am pulling up right here on my slide that you can't see because it's on another monitor. It's Cleveland and Jacksonville. That is our only game left we have to show you. Cleveland 6-3. If they win, they will still be the number 1 seed in the Northern Conference. And Jacksonville on a 5-game skid. And Cleveland dominated 31-6 in this game. I'm going to guess Jim Brown was the MVP, right? No, Otto Graham. Cleveland jumped out 14-0 on a 45-yard pass from Graham to Warfield. Then Jim Brown, a 16-yard run. Graham, 25-yard pass to Warfield. Motley ran one in from 13, and then Chris Barr from 30. Hollis kicked 2 field goals, and that was the only scoring for Jacksonville, who is now 2-8, creeping up on Tampa Bay for the low spot here in the HTFL. We'll look at the team stats. 417 yards for Cleveland, just 196 for Jacksonville. Cleveland in the red zone, 2 touchdowns and a field goal on 3 tries. Only 10 penalties in the game, and pretty well played. Time of possession was about even. Cleveland ran 58 plays. Jacksonville ran 52. Okay, looking at the player stats. Jim Brown, 109 yards. And Otto Graham with 258 in terms of passing yards and his rating 115.1. Blake Bortles came in the game late and threw a completion in his one attempt. Actually had a higher rating than did Otto Graham. Kellen Winslow Jr., 101 yards receiving on 6 catches. And we'll look at the defensive stats, and no players over 10. Johnson had 9 for Cleveland. Puslowsny had 9 for Jacksonville. So, let me first set up the computer here to play the 10 games. The 10 games we will be showing you this week are San Diego and Buffalo, Carolina and New York, Denver and Pittsburgh, San Francisco traveling to Detroit, Miami goes to Philadelphia, Dallas goes to Minnesota. That should be a big game. Houston and Kansas City. Tennessee and St. Louis, and Las Vegas and Green Bay. The Monday night game will be Los Angeles and Washington, and that ought to be a good one. So looking at the divisional races in the Upper East now, you have New England at 5-5. Buffalo is up to 4-6. New York and Philadelphia yet to play. In the Lower East, Washington. Nobody played in the Lower East yet, so it's still Washington, St. Louis, Dallas, and Miami a half game behind Dallas because they have played the extra game, and so has Jacksonville. Upper South, you have Carolina leading the way, Indianapolis 4-6, Tennessee 3-6, and Atlanta 3-7. In the Lower South, Houston can now tie New Orleans, but New Orleans would own the tiebreaker, and you got Jacksonville, who has played one more game than everybody else except Miami, and Tampa Bay 0-10, and not looking good for them. In the Upper North, only Chicago has played. Minnesota, Green Bay, Detroit, and Chicago now. That's your order. In the lower, not lower south, the lower north, Cleveland 7-3. Baltimore will be our first game for Week 11 that we were going to play. Baltimore and San Diego in Baltimore. Cincinnati a half game ahead of Pittsburgh. Upper West, great division here, and only Seattle has played, and they moved to 4-6. Lower West, Los Angeles, San Diego, Las Vegas could get into the race if Los Angeles falters and Arizona picks up their second win and goes to 2-8. So I hope you enjoyed today's recap show. We should give you an updated time. I'm going to do these games live from here on out, most of them, with the exception of holiday games. For instance, like when Thanksgiving comes, I'll probably put that game up and tape it beforehand. Not doing games Christmas Eve or Christmas Day, or New Year's Eve or New Year's Day. Let everybody enjoy their holidays, but we're going to find ways to bring you bonus games as things warrant. So the next three games, we're not going to do them at 7, we're going to do them 7:30. So I can do them live and play them out right in front of you. San Diego and Baltimore, Carolina, New York, Denver, and Pittsburgh. So I hope you enjoyed today's little frolic through Week 11 of the Hometown Football League. We will be with you at 7:30 to do San Diego and Baltimore. And we should be able to get that game in before Monday Night Football begins, or just as it begins. This has been Big Paulie coming to you. We wish you well, no matter where you are, no matter when you see this. Godspeed and God bless, and we'll do it all again soon. Bye-bye for now, everybody.